In 1997, a British soldier was exploring a forgotten tunnel deep inside the Rock of Gibraltar when his flashlight fell on something that stopped him cold. A sealed door. Untouched. Silent. As if the rock itself had swallowed a room hole. When they broke through, what they found inside had been waiting for over 50 years. Food tins, medical supplies, radio equipment, and a hand-built furnace. Not for cooking. For burning human bodies. This was never meant to be found, and the men who built it never expected to leave. This is the story of Operation Tracer, one of the most extraordinary and disturbing secret plans in the entire history of World War II. A plan so hidden that even today, most people have never heard of it. But they should have, because in 1941, 6 volunteers agreed to be sealed alive inside a rock forever if the war went wrong. Let that land for a moment. Not stationed, not deployed, sealed. Entombed in silence, with nothing but radio equipment, a year's worth of rations, and the understanding that no matter what happened, there was no exit plan. No rescue mission, no door that opened from the inside. To understand why. You need to understand what Gibraltar meant to the world at that moment. It is a tiny peninsula, less than 3 miles long, barely a rock jutting from the southern tip of Spain into the sea. And yet in 1941, it was arguably the single most strategically important piece of land on the planet. The Strait of Gibraltar is where the Atlantic Ocean meets the Mediterranean Sea. A narrow corridor, barely 8 miles wide at its thinnest point. Every Allied ship supplying North Africa, every Royal Navy vessel entering the Mediterranean, every convoy keeping Britain's war alive passed through this gap. Whoever controlled Gibraltar controlled the throat of the war. Adolf Hitler knew this. He'd already drawn up a plan, codenamed Operation Felix, to capture Gibraltar, and sealed the Mediterranean entirely. German paratroopers, artillery battalions, panzer divisions moving through Spain. If Franco had said yes, the rock would have fallen. The Allies knew they couldn't let that information corridor go dark. So, British intelligence asked a terrifying question. What if Gibraltar falls, but we still need eyes inside? What if we left someone behind? The answer was Operation Tracer. The plan was coldly precise. 6 men would be chosen. A wireless operator, a doctor. Observers, they would be hidden inside a hand-carved cave deep within the rock, a cavity drilled into solid limestone, invisible from the outside, accessible only through a passage that would be permanently sealed with concrete once the men were inside. From tiny observation, slits carved into the cliff face, disguised as natural erosion, they would watch ship movements, enemy troop positions, naval traffic through the strait, everything transmitted by radio to London. Day after day, week after week, month after month. For 1 year, that was the planned duration. 365 days inside a stone coffin. But then came the detail that no mission brief ever quite prepares you for. The document outlining Operation Tracer contained a clause so stark it reads almost like a sentence. Not a plan. If a man dieth, his body will not be removed. It will be disposed of within the stabby hind post. That furnace wasn't accidental. That furnace was policy, because if Gibraltar fell to Nazi forces and those soldiers were discovered, the entire operation collapsed. Wars. The men could be interrogated, the intelligence network exposed. So the living would burn the dead, and if all 6 died, the radio would simply go silent. And London would know. The men who volunteered for this understood exactly what they were signing. And still, they signed, "We don't know all their names. That information remains classified or lost, but records confirm they were selected, trained, and prepared. The cave was excavated and fitted. The supplies were stockpiled. The concrete was ready. Operation Tracer was fully armed and waiting to be triggered. And then something remarkable happened. Franco, dictator of Spain, a man who owed his very existence in power to Nazi military support, refused to let Hitler march through Spanish territory. The reasons were complicated. Spain was exhausted from its own civil war. Franco wanted territorial concessions Hitler wasn't willing to give. Some historians believe Franco was more cunning than cruel, stringing Hitler along with endless demands, knowing the operation would stall. Whatever the reason, Operation Felix was cancelled. Gibraltar never fell. The 6 men were never sealed inside. Operation Tracer was stood down. The cave was locked. The entrance was hidden. The paperwork was classified and the secret calcified inside the rock, just like the room itself, waiting in darkness for decades. Until Sergeant Donnie McGee crawled through the wrong tunnel in 1997 and cracked the silence open. The team that investigated the cave found it exactly as it had been left. Remarkably preserved. Every tin, every instrument, every piece of medical equipment, sitting in the cool limestone dark, as if the men had only just stepped out, except they never stepped out, because the door was never meant to open. What Operation Tracer tells us is something uncomfortable about war that history prefers to leave in the dark. It tells us that governments will ask people to make sacrifices that have no ceremony, no medal, no march, no one watching. 6 men were prepared to disappear from the world, not in battle, not in glory, but in silence, sealed inside a rock, watching ships through a slit in the stone, burning their dead, talking to no one, trusting that what they heard on the radio still meant something was worth fighting for. They never had to do it, but they said yes anyway. And maybe that's the most haunting part of this story. Not the furnace, not the sealed door, not the year's worth of rations still perfectly stacked in the dark, but the fact that somewhere 6 men went home at the end of the war and never told anyone what they had been willing to do. The rock kept their secret. And for 50 years, so did they.